Good morning, everyone. Bonjour. Welcome back to this morning's plenary session, which is entitled Towards Paris 2015, Vers Paris 2015, Why It Matters to Investors and What Should They Do. And our keynote speaker this morning, whom we are very pleased to welcome, just in last night from New York, Christiana Figueres, Executive Secretary, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Christiana Figueres has a long and distinguished career in climate change and sustainability issues, having participated in the climate change negotiations since 1995. She's made important contributions to the literature on the design of climate solutions, worked with governments and NGOs, and has been a frequent advisor to the private sector. Please welcome Christiana Figueres.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much to PRI, to UNEP, and to the Global Compact for this invitation. But above all, thank you very much for helping to move me into the francophonie, right? We are going to be celebrating our COP in Paris next year. And the very first time that I had the pleasure of meeting with Minister Fabius, he, of course, he speaks a beautiful English, by the way. But of course, he immediately went into his French for about half an hour, intentionally. And then he looked, very, very innocent, and he goes, "Oh, you don't speak French." I was completely stunned. And I said, "No, sir, I don't." He says, "Well, you will by Paris." So I do have a task ahead of me. Not only do we have to deliver an agreement, but I shall have to learn French. So I very much appreciate every time that I'm reminded of that. So like, for example, by the sign that was up there when I walked in, learning French is definitely on my to-do list. I'm not sure when the to-do list gets done. Anyway, please raise your hands if you were in New York this week. Was that a fantastic week or what? It was just phenomenal, right? It was really, really phenomenal. And it's very, very difficult to summarize New York. The SG, the Secretary General of the United Nations, did, I think, a very good job in putting out a summary of his day, of Tuesday. But that doesn't speak to everything else that happened the whole week. And so I have made a feeble attempt at summarizing a fantastic week in 3 words, irresponsible as that is. So my 3 words are must, can, and will. What do I mean by that? So I arrived on Thursday and did a whole bunch of meetings with very, very excited people who were getting the last details in place for the march. And then I went to the march, as I'm sure all of you who were in New York did. I went there with my 2 daughters and 1 niece who flew in overnight from Costa Rica as a surprise because she wanted to be with me at the march. And I cannot tell you, the excitement of that march was beyond anything that we have ever felt. It was absolutely unprecedented public mobilization, unprecedented enthusiasm, and unprecedented clarity in the call that we must address climate change. So that was at the end of Sunday. And then we went into Monday, Climate Week, starting with an awesome start. CEO of Apple, CEO of IKEA, a whole array of fantastic corporate leaders. And my sense from the Climate Week and from part of the Secretary General on Tuesday is that the corporate sector, the investment sector, the insurance sector have now finally reached the conclusion that not only must we address climate change, we actually can address climate change. And they were putting forward their solutions, their commitments, their pledges as to how they are going to help us to get there. So now we have the must, we have the can, and then we walk into the Secretary General's summit on Tuesday, where my conclusion is that governments are beginning to say, perhaps not as enthusiastically as those who marched on Sunday, but they're beginning to say, okay, we will address climate change. All right? So now we have the must, the can, and the will. Now here's the trick, my friends. These three cannot stand as mutually exclusive silos or pillars. In order for this thing to get done, we actually have to bring all of these together. We have to be able to link the must with the can and the can with the will. So how do we do that? Well, linking the must with the can, I think, got a lot of push forward in New York at the beginning of the week. Because here's what I heard, just to give you, top line couple of messages. I heard institutional investors, many of whom may be here today, say that they are going to decarbonize up to 100 billion and disclose the carbon footprint of 500 billion. A very good start. I heard 3 major pension funds say that they're actually going to accelerate their investment of 31 billion into low carbon by 2020, so giving themselves a deadline there. I heard the insurance industry, the one that is going to be hit the most or is already being hit the most, the insurance industry stand up and say, well, this is also about our survival, frankly, our financial survival. So we are going to double our green investments to the tune of 80 billion by 2015, and then tenfold multiply that by 2020. I heard 73, actually by last night it was 75 governments, 1,000 corporations, and 11 regions say we want and we need carbon pricing. I heard the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. I mean, there's something in the air, right? When the Rockefeller Brothers, just think, Rockefeller Brothers Fund say they're going to divest their assets. There is definitely something in the air. And in case nobody had pictured or nobody had understood that there was something in the air, NASDAQ Stock Exchange yesterday opened with a huge billboard that said addressing climate change. So what is there not to like about New York, right? And then you all crowned it all by releasing yesterday, and thank you to PRI, by releasing your Montreal Carbon Pledge. So very, very concrete measures of moving forward on how do you bring the must and the can together and ensure that we actually move into the will. But let me speak to that, because I think New York and Montreal are definitely blowing wind in the sails of governments. But the question is the wind strong enough? So let me chart you through the course that governments have in front of them. Lima, Peru, this December. They are currently on the table and on record to have agreed to elements, and I use that in quotation mark, elements of a draft text in Lima. The COP president, the Minister of Environment of Peru, has actually been very public in saying, from his perspective, he has the political responsibility of this COP. He wants not just elements, he wants a draft text. And I believe that they're moving in that direction. So let us take that, let us give them the benefit of all doubt, and let us say by the end of Lima, Peru, we will have a draft text. Very important, because how many Copenhagen survivors do we have in the room? That's it? Everybody else is dead or what? Okay, well, I'm a Copenhagen survivor. So with you who were there, you remember that one of the huge problems is that we went with 300 pages that were not a text of an agreement. It was just a fantastic compilation of wishes, desires, and Christmas wish list, but Christmas letters, but certainly not a legal text. So very, very different process. We shall have a text a whole year ahead of time so that governments can then finalize it the next year. Now, March, another date to keep on your radar screen. By March, countries will have reported to the Climate Secretariat. They will have reported what their, sorry to hit you with an acronym, INDC, their intended nationally determined contributions. Hard to remember what it means. But basically it is, they're all doing their homework right now. Every single one of the major economies is doing their homework as to, from an economic, technological, and political point of view, what can they bring to the table. Every single major economy is doing that, and most developing countries, because the expectation is no matter how big or how small, no matter how fat or how thin, no matter where you are, in the tropics or in the temperate zones, you will bring forward your INDC. So even developing countries are working on their contribution, some of them still needing some support to finalize, but certainly all the major economies working on that. And I was very, very happy to hear Secretary of State Kerry publicly confirm for the first time that the United States will bring its nationally determined contribution in a timely fashion in March. So that should also give confidence to all of the other major economies that they can also be timely and put that in. Why is that important? Because after that, they're going to give themselves 3 to 6 months to sort of look over each other's shoulders and see, what you are putting forward here, is that actually corresponding to both your responsibility and your capacity? Is it something that is comparable to mine? So they will have a constructive conversation about each other's contributions from about March to about September, more or less. In between there, they will also at the same time be finalizing the draft text that they adopt in Lima, and we will then remove from their desks on April 15, more or less. On April 15, we will remove from their desks whatever document they have up until then. You can imagine that it is in everybody's interest that that document have as few square brackets as possible. So we will have to remove that document from their desks and send it to translation into all 6 UN languages. And then that document goes as the agreement that will be adopted in Paris to all governments of the world. I envision, although nobody has told me, but I envision that after May, there will be at least 194 cabinet meetings in 194 countries where every government will have to come together and discuss that agreement. That agreement is going to have such an impact on the future of every single nation, and certainly on the future of the world, that that agreement is not one that can be authorized by any one single Minister of State, Secretary of State. That agreement is one of such importance that it will have to be discussed among all ministers at cabinet level. So picture cabinet meetings in the summer, in the fall, in which that agreement is basically going to be put to two scrutinies. Does it reflect national interest, but also, is it globally responsible? Those will be the 2 guiding questions that that discussion is going to be focused on. And then from there, my friends, we go to the much anticipated Paris meeting in December, where there is no doubt that that agreement, that regulatory framework at the global level, needs to not only bring together and harvest all of the short-term contributions that they will put on the table in March, but frankly, it needs to be a framework that is going to guide this economy over the next 30 to 50 years. This is not a business plan for 5 years. This is not a business plan even for 10 years. This has got to be a business plan that focuses all efforts, all sectors, all stakeholders toward the low-carbon economy over the next 30 to 50 years, because that is the time frame that is needed for this transformation. So, my friends, that brings me to my requests for you. And many of you have heard me speak before, and so you will not be surprised that I always ask for help. Now, since I am in a room full of friends, since all of you are here because you understand the importance of this, because all of you are members of PR, because all of you are really already on this path, I will give myself the luxury of not making one request, which I usually do, but 3. This is the price of success and of commitment, okay? So here are my 3 requests for all of you. Number 1, help me to scrub the lobbying practices. Help me to scrub the lobbying practices. Even if you individually are not lobbying against ambitious climate policy in the jurisdictions in which you are present, I wouldn't guarantee that your associations, your networks, everything that is under your influence is not doing the same. I would ask you, number 1, to commit to truly doing a little investigation process to find out whether everyone who is under your sphere of influence is actually at least being neutral on climate policy, but certainly it is in all of our interests that they be lobbying for climate policy. Because, my friend, this is it. We have 15 months to put a regulatory framework that is actually going to guide us over the next 30 to 50 years. If we do not do this in Paris, the economic consequences are ones that you have understood, but I also want to tell you the political consequences, which is what I'm responsible for. I guarantee you, it has taken me 5 years to build the global mood on climate back up from the trash can in which it was in Copenhagen to a global mood that is today saying, maybe we can. I don't think there's a resounding, yes, we will, yes, we can. But there is at least optimism that we can do this. And that is not enough. We have to. We have to go beyond optimism, okay? We have to go to achievement. If we don't do it in Paris, I guarantee you that it will take not 5 years, but 10 to rally the political will, again, around the table to come to yet another agreement. And at least in Costa Rica, and I know that we Latin Americans are not really good about math, but at least in Costa Rica, 2015 plus 10 puts us into 225. By 225, my dear friends, it will be too late. It will be too late to keep us under 2 degrees, and it will be incredibly expensive because we will try to do it anyway, but it will be very expensive, and it will be so disruptive that it really threatens business continuity, not to even name the human pain that that would cause. So to avoid systemic risk that you cannot afford and human pain that the world cannot afford, my friends, please help me to scrub lobbying practices. Ask number 1. Can I check that one off? All right. Good. Then, after we have done that little homework, right, and we're getting, revved up to do this, my request number 2. Do you remember these cabinet meetings that I talked to you about? Many of you, if not most of you, certainly at your CEO levels, you have access to the ministers of finance in the jurisdictions in which you are. I would ask that you send this up the flagpole and have your CEOs march themselves in to the ministers of finance and explain the disruption and the risk that the global economy would face if we do not get an ambitious agreement in Paris. They need to understand this. This is not an environmental agreement, okay? This is the major economic and technological transformation that the world has ever seen. It's also the greatest opportunity. But never before has there been such a contrast between the threat and the opportunity. And we have to align ourselves with the opportunity by making very clear what the threats are. So I think ministers of finance need to understand that they need to contribute to an ambitious agreement through that cabinet meeting, because otherwise they're not going to allow you to do your fiduciary duty. And you have a sacred and legal fiduciary duty. So conversations with ministers of finance on your to-do list also. Not as difficult as me learning French. And thirdly, my dear friends, the Montreal Carbon Pledge. I would really like to thank PRI for this initiative. I think it is fantastic. Now, being the impatient woman that I am, may I say it is a fantastic start. What do we have to do? We have to put the Montreal Carbon Pledge on steroids. If I understand it correctly, but please feel free to correct me in public, I think what is the aim here is to put $3 trillion into carbon disclosure and carbon footprint measuring. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. Well, what happens with the other 19? Do we have here in the room $22 trillion under management in equity? And so what, are we going to just leave 19 in the closet? No, frankly, my friends, the time has come to really take this very seriously. Very, very seriously. And again, we have 15 months. And the good news is you don't have to do this, by doing all of the data collection on your own. FTSE is going to be putting forward a very, very, very important index that will help you to do the carbon footprint analysis of the companies that you're invested in. And so it basically is copy and paste from the FTSE index. You will be able to get that data very, very easily. So, my dear friends, my third request to you is to take that Montreal Carbon Pledge to 22 trillion. I know, I'm seeing uncomfortable smiles in the room. I know there are many, many hurdles to that. But could you please just stop 1 minute and think of the alternative? It is one, frankly, that none of us want. Because the goal that we have here in front of us is to make an intentional choice. An intentional choice. Here's the deal. $90 billion will be $90 trillion will be invested in infrastructure over the next 15 years. It's going to be invested anyway. Whether we, Paris or no Paris, climate change or no climate change, just because of rising economic growth, rising population, and aging infrastructure. So the new economy report released last week tells us that over those 15 years, that investment in infrastructure, if we add 1 to 5% of that, we can actually make the difference between old fossil fuel-based infrastructure or clean infrastructure, which would make absolutely, that is where this is going to actually make or break the difference in the transformation of the economy. It is the quality of that infrastructure. The quality of energy, the quality of infrastructure that is going to be built over the next 15 years is the equivalent. If I had a blackboard, I would write a little equation, okay? Quality of infrastructure, quality of investment equals quality of life. It's as simple as that equation. Equals quality of life. So if for 5 to 10% we can actually make that difference, my friends, I think we're called to do that. And not only will it only cost us 1 to 5%, but it would reduce health costs, it would reduce energy insecurity, it will reduce huge costs in dealing with immigration, it will reduce transportation costs, it will make for better, healthier, happier cities. Come on, what is there not to like about that? But in order to get there, we have to have the future very, very clear. We have to know that what we all collectively, the business plan that we are collectively writing here, has one goal in mind. We have to get to global peaking of greenhouse gas emissions over the next 10 years. Global peaking. Now you know why you have to go to 22 trillion, right? Not the 3. Global peaking over the next 10 years, and then we have to reach climate neutrality, zero net, whatever you want to call it, but basically the balance between what we are emitting and what we as an Earth can absorb. That balance is the one that the Industrial Revolution, unbeknownst to all who were there, disturbed, and the balance that we have to restore. That's where we have to be over the next 50 years. I was just in New York. Let me finalize with a story from the wisest people on earth. You might think those are gurus, Zen masters, or the elders. No, they are taxi drivers. In New York, I get into a taxi, and in my typical, complete disorientation way, I get in a frenzy. I'm so delighted to get a taxi, which is, the scarcest resource in New York this week. I get in there, and I say to the gentleman driving, I go, I'm going uptown, and just start driving, and I will soon tell you where I'm going. And then I fiddle around to try to find, my outdated BlackBerry to try to figure out where am I going. And the man doesn't move. And then he turns around and he goes, lady, if you will just tell me exactly where you're going, I will get you there faster, more efficiently, and cheaper. And I thought, now is that a lesson from the universe? That is the lesson from the universe, right? My friends, that's exactly what we have to do. If we know exactly where we're going, we're going to get there faster, more efficiently, and cheaper. And that is what we need to do. Because I am sure you know that the future is actually going to happen. How wise a statement is that, okay? Believe it or not, the future is going to happen. Now, it's either going to happen by default, if we do nothing, or it's going to happen by design. And we cannot afford default. It's got to be an intentional choice. It's got to be a future that we create, a future that we design. We don't have the other option. We have to get to the low carbon economy, and we are going to get there. You know what? We're going to get there either by physics, under business as usual, because the systemic risk will be so large that it will just slam it in our face, or we're going to get there by policy. And believe you me, it is in all of our interests for us to get there by policy, because that is the only way that we can have this transformation in an orderly fashion, that we can ensure business continuity, and above all, the moral imperative. It is the only way that we will be able to guarantee the well-being of the most vulnerable. My dear friends, I hope that you've taken note of 3 asks. I almost want to do a pop quiz and say, okay, what's number 1, what's number 2, and what's number 3? But I trust that you are here because you are committed, and that you're here because you have one question in mind. What else can I do? So I thank you for everything that you have done. And I know the road to where we are has not been easy. But I also ask you to go on steroids. We have 15 months, my friends. 15 months. And I think all of us want to stand there in January 2016 and be able to tell our beneficiaries and our children, we knew it, and we did the right thing. Thank you.